let's take a look at a couple different options for stands that you could have in your studio. If you were like me, you figured there's just one stand, a regular light stand, but there's actually a lot of different options, and some are going to be better for different jobs. And that's actually why there's so much grip out there and there's so many different tools. Is maybe some are going to be better for being lightweight, lower profile, some are going to be heavier duty. So I want to take a moment to decode some of the different options you have for light stands in the studio. All right, so you are probably familiar with the standard light stand. And the benefit of it is it's generally lightweight, and it also can be pretty low profile. So if I want, I can compact it and take it with me on the go. Or I can change the size of the base. So if I change the size of the base here, I'm in a smaller space, it's going to take up less area. Technically, however, when you're using a stand, you should actually use it so that these joints are at a right angle. That's when it's going to be at its most stable. Now, while this light stand is the standard, and it's probably what you will use most of the time, there are reasons to purchase other tools. So for example, let's take a look at some of the tools when you need your light stand to get a little bit lower. This may be an instance where you want to have your light directly behind your subject. And if you have your subject seated, a lot of times if you're posing them, the light will actually start popping out from behind them. Or maybe you're photographing on location with studio strobes and you want to have the light just tucked away in the corner. So for that reason, there's a couple of different floor stands as well as baby plates. All right, so let's take a look at this floor stand. As you can tell, it is much smaller. It can be very, very low profile, but it actually has a bunch of different things it can do. Now, obviously you can put a light up top, but this one gives you a bunch of different options. This particular pin allows you to connect the light anywhere that you'd like. So I can actually take out the column in the center, and I can put the pin here, or there's another pin I can put in the corner. So this is going to allow me to have multiple lights, or I can have them in different places. The point is it's really versatile, so whenever I need to stick a light on the floor in the corner, but actually be able to change my angle, this is going to be better than just putting the light on the floor. They actually make other tools for this same purpose as well, like this plate. And so it has standard pins for fitting studio strobes. You can attach it to there, and then you can weight down the sides of it. So all of these things are listed in our gear guide. So if you want to take a look, I've listed the specific ones, the brands, the tools that I have here. So to this point, I've covered kind of your basic light stand. Again, you can change the size of the base, which is really, really useful. And then if you need to get down, lower profile. But for the most part, you don't want to put a lot of weight on any of the stands that I've covered so far. If you watch me shooting, a lot of times I have big lights that are kind of boomed out or put over top of my scene, and these would not do the job. So let's take a moment and look at the heavier duty options you have for supporting your studio strobes. If you're working with bigger lights or heavier lights, or even just more expensive lights in the studio, you're going to want to invest in a good stand. I remember way back when, in my very first studio, I had a really cheap stand. You know, it was the cheapest one that came with the inexpensive kit that I had. And then I bought this plastic arm that I could kind of put my light on and have it out over the scene. And one day when I was cranking it, I broke the plastic. And not only does that break the stand, but there goes my light and the modifier crashing to the ground, thankfully not hitting the people that were my subjects. So a stand and an arm is not something you really want to skimp on. So let me give you a look at some of your options. If you have the ability to, you definitely want a heavier duty stand for your main light, or anytime you're putting a lot of weight on a stand. And so for me, most of the time, for my heavier setups, I am using a C-stand, and that's what you'll see here. It's heavier duty, it's metal. Also, it's got a wider and more stable base, so it's going to be able to handle heavier setups or something that's a little bit larger. Now, I didn't know this, but there are right and wrong ways to use a C-stand and an arm. All right, so first of all, one of the things that you want to consider is when you have this arm, let me just bring it out here. If you have your light and your all of the weight out over this arm, what you want to make sure is that this arm is over the biggest leg of the C-stand. The reason why is, notice, if you've got a lot of weight here, and I'm pulling the stand this direction, not really much movement. It's really stable over that biggest leg. But if I go the other direction and I have the weight out the opposite side and I give it a little tug, just a little, it falls right over. It's not stable at all. So when you're looking at it, wherever your light is, make sure that that is over the biggest leg. That'll be the most stable you can be. There's a couple other things to make this more stable and avoid mistakes. All right, so these knuckles right here, they hold the extension arms. These are C-stand extension arms. You wanna make sure that the arm is going through the top holes of the knuckle, not the bottom. And so you wanna kind of have it here. That'll be more stable as well. But then the next part of it is this. You should actually test which way the arm, the knuckle, tightens or loosens. Because if you have a lot of weight on the arm, you can actually have it set so that it untightens, it loosens the arm, and then everything falls. So you don't want to do that. So what you're looking at is this. All right, so I'm looking at the handle of the knuckle here. All right, lefty-loosey, right? Righty-tighty. In the direction that you're tightening it, so to the right when you're looking at it, that is the direction you want the weight to be. The reason why is when you put the weight on this side, it actually will tighten the grip. However, if I have the other direction and I have all the weight out to the left-hand side, as I put the weight on, it actually loosens the grip. It actually untightens it. So it does make a difference. So when I am setting up a C-stand with an extension arm, I'm making a list of a couple things. Okay, I put the light out there. I want to make sure it's over the biggest leg. I want to make sure that the arm is through the top of the knuckle. And I want to make sure when I'm tightening that arm, the direction that it tightens is the direction I have my lights. So there's a few things to make it more stable, but there's even more that I usually do. Typically, if I've got a lot of weight or I have those arms really far out, what I'll do is I'll add either a counterweight or a sandbag or both. So what a counterweight will do is if I've got a lot of weight out here, I can put it on the opposite end and it kind of balances things out. And then you can add a sandbag to the legs of your C-stand. When you add a sandbag, you want to be careful though. You do not want to add it to the smallest leg, because what happens is when you add it to the smallest leg, often it'll actually touch the floor. And as soon as the sandbag is touching the floor, it's not weighting anything down anymore. So it kind of defeats the purpose. So what I'll usually do is I'll either put it over the biggest leg or I'll wrap it around the center column. And if I've got a ton of weight or something really expensive out there, or it's really long, I put on however many sandbags I have onto that C-stand. So let me kind of wrap it around the middle here. Something like that. So all of these things are considerations. And back when I started and got my first stand, I had no idea that you had to consider these things. So what I actually use in the studio for my main light is one of these last two setups. Again, it's a C-stand. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit taller, so I have a little bit more extension for height if I need. But specifically, I use this boom arm. And this boom arm is the Avenger D600. And the reason I use it is, first of all, when I'm moving the arm here, I can't mess it up. I can't actually point it the wrong direction, so that's nice. But also, it has these extension arms. And so I can boom things way, way out with no effort. So the D600 is what I use. It's also really, really stable. And then over here on the other side of it, on the far side, I have a perfect place for a counterweight to balance out if I put a big, huge modifier on this stand. Or I actually have something called a pumpkin head, which is a bit larger and can fit on the boom arm here as a counterweight as well. So it's a little bit heavier duty, and I can use that for stability. But of course, all of the rules apply about having the bigger leg, having the lights out over that larger leg. And so I may need to rotate my setup and tighten the arms so that it's its most stable. Same thing, going to be nice and stable. And of course, sandbags. All right, so this last stand here, because it's not a C-stand, I have this rolling stand. You'll notice how wide the base is. For really small spaces, this isn't going to be practical. But for me, it's really nice because I can very easily move around my setup. And of course, I can lock the legs if I need to. Again, I have the Avenger D600 as the boom arm on the stand. So if you're looking to buy these things, they're all separate. You're gonna get the base of the stand as one thing, the arm, whether it's an extension arm or a boom arm, as a separate thing, any counterweights or sandbags, that's all a separate thing. In fact, some of these stands, the stands and the wheels are separate. So you just have to make sure you're careful with what you're purchasing, which is why I have the links and all the details right in the gear guide. So for this stand, it's got a very, very wide base so that it has lots of stability. The wider the base, the more stable it is. The narrower, the more easy it is to flop over. But again, it takes up less space. So this is what I use most often in my studio. And when you're checking to buy a stand, also check how high you can extend the stand, depending on what kind of setups you have and of course what space you have. All right, so I actually never realized how much there was to selecting stands. And so basically what you need to consider is how portable do they need to be? How heavy do they need to be? How much space can they take up? How much weight do they need to hold? And of course, what is your budget? These are all things that you're considering when you're looking for the right light stands for you. So let's take a look at grip. These are the tools that help you solve problems in your studio. And what I mean by that is maybe you need a light up in the corner, or maybe you need your set to be elevated a little bit. All of these are the tools that help you solve problems, make use of your space, make better use of your gear. And so I want to start off with the essentials, and then I'll get into a little bit of the more nitty-gritty specialty tools. So of course, one of the things that is essential and one of the basics in most studio is something called apple boxes. And so apple boxes come in different sizes. They come in full, half, quarter, and pancake, and you can often buy them kind of nestled together in one purchase. I use my apple boxes all the time. I use them whether I want to be a little bit higher, or maybe I want to elevate the scene, or I want my subject to be able to put their foot on it for a particular pose. I use them over and over again. And also, if you want to actually include them in your set, what I do is I buy vintage apple boxes, kind of the old, the rustic looking, and I will use these new ones as a base because they're sturdy. I'll put the vintage ones over top so I have a better appearance, but it's a little bit safer maybe for a subject to sit upon. So I use these all the time. They become very, very useful, whether it's posing or changing angles or changing heights of things. So that would be an essential. But then another thing I absolutely recommend you really need is gaff tape, or sometimes called gaffer tape. You can't use duct tape, scotch tape, electrical tape in the studio, because what happens if I take duct tape and I put it on a light and the light's warm, not only does it melt the duct tape, but it leaves a really sticky, awful residue and it ends up ruining my lights. In fact, sometimes it'll even smoke. So gaffer's tape is intended to be used with lighting and all of these things. And I use it for everything, whether I'm trying to tape something up to a wall or whether I'm taping down a background or I'm attaching gels to my lights. So gaffer's tape, gaff tape is a must-have. It's a little bit more expensive, or actually it's a lot more expensive, so you want to use it sparingly. Next down the line of must-haves would be A-clamps. A-clamps, as you can see, come in different sizes. The bigger A-clamps you could use to attach a background to a stand, for example. Whereas the smaller ones, you can use them to clip clothing a little bit tighter. I always keep a variety of A-clamps available because you never know when you need them, but you always need them. All right, so now we're gonna move over into a little bit more of the utility knuckles and clamps and things like this. It's a little bit more of the specialty tools. So a tool that you'll find in most bigger studios would be this knuckle. And so you may recognize it because it's the knuckle that's used to hold my extension arm for my C-stand. And so the arm fits right in these holes, and then I can use it to adjust the angle. And this fits on top of a stand. But there's other things that you can use it for. For example, in the smaller holes, it's got different size holes, I could actually put in a flag. I can put in this arm, tighten it up, and then I can hold a flag in my scene. Or you don't even need to use the holes. I can actually loosen this, open up the space in the center, and maybe I want a little bit of a white fill card. Maybe I want to have a white piece of foam core in my scene. Now, I can simply tighten it. I'm just using the opening in the center. And now I can put this on any of my stands and have a reflector in the scene. So these knuckles, whether you're holding pieces of board or backgrounds or flags or arms, you name it, they're super useful, and they have a variety of different utilities. Okay, so now we're getting into some more serious things. We're getting into clamps. So super clamps, sometimes called maffer clamps, these also can be used for a million different reasons, because they can open up really, really wide. And so they can hold something like a big arm or a big piece of material, or they can close down really small. So they've got a lot of variety to them. Typically, what you're gonna either use them for is often to hold backgrounds or hold lights, but you usually have to modify them to do those things. So for example, the super clamp that I have here, I've attached to it, this is an add-on, something called a J-hook. And you can hang anything you want from a J-hook. What I use it for is I attach this to a pole, and then I use the J-hook to hold my background pole. So I use this for a stand, and then the background pole. So this is a J-hook. But then also, for the super clamp, there's other modifications. So I want to introduce you to this little useful pin. This is a baby pin. And on either side of it, you've got two threaded male ends. So on one side, you have the 3/8 end, and the other side, you have the 5/8 end. If you look around in photography, these are the two threads you see over and over and over again. The smaller one, the 3/8, you see, for example, on the bottom of a lot of cameras. And the 5/8 you'll see a lot on the top of light stands. And so these, I mean, they're super useful. You'll find them over and over and over again. So for example, with this super clamp, there's a hole in the bottom. And so if I have the 3/8 end sticking out, I could attach a camera to it. Or if I flip it the other direction, I could attach a light to it. Then I can clamp this to anything, even a pole in the ceiling, and have a light hanging off of that. So it helps you make better use of your space. It helps you problem solve. And there's so many other useful things for grip. There's this right here. This is a Cardellini style clamp. And so as you can see, I mean, by the way that it's shaped, I can kind of just clamp onto things like backgrounds or foam core, you name it. And if you look at this end, it's a 3/8 size. And so I can screw this in, and now I can attach that to a super clamp. So if you kind of know these essential pins and also these essential clamps, you'll be able to kind of set up your studio or your set in any way that you need, regardless of the set or the tools that you're using. If you need a light down low or a light up high, or you need to set up a background against the wall, you name it, with these essential tools, you can usually do all the problem solving you need in your studio. All right, so now we have to talk about how you hang up your backgrounds. There are several ways to do it. You could use a C-stand with one of the extension arms and have a clamp on top if you have a small background, a very lightweight canvas background. But most of the time, you're going to need something a little heavier duty. And so I wanted to show you two options that I use often. All right, so first of all, this is a regular background stand. In fact, the stand itself is very much just like a light stand. The benefit of this is lightweight, it's portable, and on the top, there's simply one of these pins which screws on to the 3/8, and then there's going to be a hole in the pole that fits on top. So all you would need to do, and so actually a lot of them will have like a wing nut that fits on top and it locks it in place. And then of course, because of how these are built, you can add these poles to make it longer and longer. This is what you'll see most often for background stands. I mean, it weighs almost nothing, very, very portable, lightweight, and really inexpensive. That being said, sometimes you need something a little heavier duty. And one of the downsides of this is if you look how wide the base is. If you were in a very small space, it's 3 feet or so wide. If you have a space that's 6 foot wide and you need to hang a background, this isn't going to be the way to do it. So let's take a look at a couple other options. Okay. So this is what I actually use in my studio space, and this is something called an auto pole. This is not one of the cheaper or more portable options, but it is heavy duty and it works well in my space. What's nice is that this can extend way, way up, and on the very top here, I have a super clamp with a J-hook. So the background pole actually fits in this J-hook, and I can extend it all the way up to the ceiling if I want. The key thing to notice here is actually the bottom. If you look at the bottom and the top, these rubber pieces, If I extend this all the way up to the ceiling, so that it touches the ceiling, here, these are very large ceilings, but maybe you're in a space that's 8 foot or 9 foot, and then I crank this in place, what it does is it turns this into a tension rod. So it pushes up on the ceiling, down on the floor, and then these stands at the bottom, these legs, completely unnecessary. You can remove them, or I can fold it up. So what that means is in a small space, in a space where you don't have much room on the ground, you don't need to have the legs at all. You'll just have one pole on either side. So it's really good for space saving. My studio is really deep, but it's not incredibly wide, so that's actually why I choose these. If you're in a small space, it might be another option. But if you're in a really, really small space, or you just don't like having extra stands on the floor for people to trip on or to take up extra space, there are options that attach directly to the ceiling. Some of them are just like these J-hooks that attach from the ceiling down. Others are pulley and lever systems. It kind of depends if you want to be able to easily change the backgrounds out or if you want to keep the same ones up there. Basically what you're looking at is, do you want it to be portable? Do you want it to take up minimal space? Or do you want it to be permanent and take up no space at all? You're kind of balanced between these things. And of course, you always have to consider budget. So if you want to see the options that I have here or the things I've talked about, definitely check out the gear guide.